a situation where where there is a jurisdiction which is trying to assist market participants, and because it is starting afresh at a later point in time, ensure that there is fully joined up thinking as to how that it is to structure its cannabinoid business, and therefore seek to provide benefit and utility to anybody wishing to utilize its services, because they are intending to allow cultivation, extraction and processing of high THC to be manufactured and exported to legal jurisdictions for each category of product. And that way, it's intending to make matters clearer and more streamlined for people, so that they compare what they do there with what the laws are in their own jurisdiction, and know that the Isle of Man as an entity and as a location is not to interfere in the way that they deal with that matter.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that explanation. So we've got 10 minutes left for you gentlemen, and I saw on your slides you still have some material to cover. So if you just want to power through that, we won't interrupt you with any more audience questions, and we can pick back up with the discussion panel later. So go ahead, please. Okay.
And we're more than happy to field questions. What's most important here is that people with questions receive their answers. So if you have any, please fire away. I think what Matt was alluding to there with the work that we've done on the Isle of Man, it's not the first jurisdiction to attempt to go it alone, but one of the most important things is that we have a patchwork of regulations. So we have a number of different jurisdictions attempting to find a path through what is essentially a very, very complicated area for investors, for market participants, and for individuals. So we have individuals in Europe that want to receive medicinal.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. We've actually got a really important question that will.
Great.
That'll actually be, here's the question. I'll frame it for you because it touches back on the strict situation in UK, which is in stark contrast to many of the EU countries, for instance, Luxembourg, for example. So what the audience wants to know, the question is basically asking, do you think that Luxembourg, or I'm sorry, what was the other country you mentioned? Poland. Do you think their amendments and changes in the regulations and legalization are going to have any influence on the UK?
I think that it's very important to distinguish between recreational use and medicinal and supplemental use. Different states have varying attitudes to this. So we've seen since 1976, I believe, the Netherlands allowing the possession of small amounts of cannabis to be decriminalised. So we've seen the cafe culture there. That didn't result in other states following suit. In fact, it was some 20 years later when Portugal and Spain started to look to essentially decriminalisation by stealth, where you would have the authorities intentionally not enforcing these regulations. Switzerland, for example, allows the outdoor, the cultivation of hemp with a 1% THC content. Should Luxembourg proceed with their legislation, they're coming from this from a position where they have recreational, they have drug problems. I'm not saying these are necessarily in relation to cannabis, but their position would be that they have harder drug issues, and they see this as being a drugs policy as opposed to the failed, or the often viewed as failed war on drugs. They see this as more progressive way of separating harder drugs from what are deemed as softer drugs. That's not in any way to diminish some of the very high strength THC strains that we see on the market now. So no, I don't think that the British government will be led with regard to recreation. I certainly don't think the French will, but we will see a situation in Europe where some legalise it and some have a more relaxed attitude to individual use. I do not think for a moment that will extend to the supply of recreational cannabis. But it's very clear to distinguish between what the UK is doing, which is very proactive with regard to treating extractions from the cannabis plant, such as CBD in an isolated state, as being lawful. But again, we've got competing issues here because CBD itself has not been shown to be safe. We know from the GW work and the trials that they conducted that in high doses, there are adverse reactions. Not going into those now, but the balancing act there is in a medicinal environment, you have the pros and the cons. So if you are treating epilepsy in children, stopping them fitting can be offset with some of the more unpleasant adverse reactions. That set of criteria doesn't transfer across to food. Food must be regarded as safe. So what we're looking at here is trying to find what a safe daily dosage would be. And there are differing opinions. And the same extends to all of the other cannabinoids, because now people are looking for, cannabidiol, they're looking for CBG, and there are trends. And the market, as often with the law is trying to react. So as Matt talked to you earlier, these cannabis laws were enacted when nobody thought you could isolate elements of the plant. They certainly didn't know what the plant was comprised of. So we're playing catch up, and it's very difficult to create laws when the cannabis industry is racing ahead or accelerating.
Great, yeah, definitely. Laws and regulation across the world are finding themselves trying to catch up to the fast-paced cannabis industry, definitely. One more question is regarding the mention of novel foods, and more importantly, they want to know what the situation is with CBD in general in the UK. Can somebody obtain it for personal use? Do they import it? Is it smuggling? Is it illegal? What's going on with CBD specifically?
CBD in the UK is not a controlled substance, and therefore it is not regulated under the drugs laws. However, one must be very clear that the product that many people seek to obtain or import, if it contains controlled cannabinoids, so in the UK that's THC and CBN, then that product is a controlled substance. So where we see different jurisdictions having full spectrum products that contain CBD inevitably by their nature contain controlled cannabinoids and would be unlawful in the United Kingdom. If we move to broad spectrum products, again, in principle, if the controlled cannabinoids have been removed, then they also would not be regulated as controlled drugs. They would be regulated as a novel food, and the same as isolate CBD in a product, regulated as a novel food, but not as a controlled drug. It's part of the problem or the issue in the UK that different government departments have different authority depending on what a product is. So as a food, CBD is regulated by the Food Standards Agency as a novel food, which defines a certain set of criteria that must be applied to it and processes and assessments that it must go through. But in terms of its legality, a CBD or any cannabinoid product that has had the controlled cannabinoids, THC and CBN, removed would not be regulated as a narcotic, and it is positively regulated as a food.
That's terrific to know that CBD is not an issue in the UK. For our last 3 minutes,
it is an issue because of novel foods. So the distinction is, can you create a product which is not considered by the authorities to be a narcotic? Then if it's not a narcotic, it can be a food. You then have to prove the efficacy and the safety of the product. The positive is the CBD market in the UK is the largest in Europe. By a number of estimates, in the last year, it exceeded £500 million, and it's expected to grow year on year by up to 10 points.
Okay, great. So the last question for these last couple of minutes, we want to extrapolate on these complications in the UK and see how that can potentially lead to any commercial or medical developments between Asia and UK in regards to cannabis. Do you guys see anything developing in the future?
We already have a massive crossover. So I think that, the Chinese market, the investment there, and we've seen recently last week, a £50 million investment in cultivation. The extraction, the CBD market accounts for some 50% of the market. We've got isolate suppliers from the UK, product suppliers that are very successful in Japan and are making a lot of exports there and into Australia. So we're seeing a big crossover at the moment. There's an inherent, I suppose, rightly or wrongly, that there is a suspicion from both sides as to the quality of the products. But we are seeing companies from the UK now exceptionally interested in entering the Asian markets, and vice versa. Companies in Asia should see the UK as an exciting area for investment. I don't know what you think, Matt.
Yeah, returning to one of the questions earlier, there is an inherent contradiction in some of the approaches in the UK and in Europe, because the question earlier alluded to decriminalisation or legalisation of recreational use of cannabis in Europe. In the UK, that is highly unlikely to happen. However, in terms of approach to cannabinoids as food ingredients, currently the European Union are saying absolutely not. We are not prepared to assess them because we consider that they may well be narcotics. Whereas the UK takes a completely different view and says, no, they're not a narcotic. CBD is not a narcotic. It can be a food, and we're more than happy to treat it as such. So one can see that they're almost traveling in opposite directions. That in Europe, there's an appetite for legalization for recreational use, including controlled cannabinoids, but no appetite in respect of it as a use in food. Whereas in the UK, the idea that cannabis will be legalized is many, many years away. However, immediately now, the government are more than happy to allow CBD products to be manufactured and sold to its population, which is why it's the largest market in Europe, and why, when faced with the issue of we're leaving the European Union, do we keep the same rules that they have and the same approach that the European member states have and the Commission has, or are we prepared to branch out on our own? And CBD is an example, and cannabinoids that don't control narcotic cannabinoids, an example of where the UK government took the decision to say, we are happy to have this industry, we are happy to have products manufactured here, and we are happy to have products sold to our population, as long as they can be shown to be safe as a food.
Sure.
In that context, the UK truly is open for business in the cannabinoid sector, whereas at Europe at the minute, the drawbridge is pulled up and the door is firmly closed.
Great, thank you so much, because that actually touched in on the last point we wanted to bring up, was the impact of Brexit. And basically you answered the question that was proposed to us in regards to how you drew on the complications and the contradictions between the EU and the UK. For example, CBD and et cetera. However, we've got to move on to our next speaker. We really appreciate your presentation, gentlemen, and we look forward to hearing more from you in our discussion panel later this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.